The animal world of Germany is fascinating and surprisingly diverse. There are well-known and less well-known animals, loved and less loved. Some one sees rarely, others in large numbers. Less well-known and not so popular, the frogs and newts, the amphibians. Germany has around 20 species: salamanders and newts, toads and frogs. Amongst them, a really special one, which shines out with its colourful appearance. This film is about the most striking of the tailed amphibians, with spectacular footage of an exceptional animal. It leads an undercover life, silent and totally inconspicuous. A solitary animal, active at dawn and dusk. It survived the dinosaurs. It's a relic of the distant past. The fire salamander. Humans rarely get to see this nocturnal wanderer. Presumably, it returned to the German central uplands after the last ice age. When the ice came, it left. When the ice disappeared again, it returned. To this day, the main population is in the uplands, because here the amphibian has everything it needs to live: cool, shady, broadleaf woodlands with high humidity. And a diverse range of food sources, with snails, worms and all sorts of insects, as well as clean, clear and oxygen-rich head streams in which the females bear their larvae. These small flowing waters provide one of the most important conditions of their habitat. They are the ideal creche for the offspring of the fire salamanders. Here, the female salamander can give birth to her children in the early spring. The larvae remain in the water until their gills have turned to lungs during their metamorphosis. After that, they live only on land. The fire salamander needs water only for procreation. Their woodland habitat must provide adult fire salamanders with good refuges. Not just frost-proof caves to hibernate in, but also day retreats for protection against sunlight and dehydration. Countless generations of fire salamanders were happy with these conditions for a long time. But at some point, something must have caused them to change their reproductive behavior and adapt to new habitats. The remarkable thing is that the animals with the new behavior can distinguish each other from their peers. Nobody knows how the differentiation of the various types occurred, but this will soon change. This man is on a professional hunt for the fire salamander, Dr. Sebastian Steinfartz. The zoologist has been researching this wooded area near Bonn for several years. This is where he first discovered the changes in the reproductive behavior of the fire salamander.
Research into this behavior is still very new and at an early stage. First, we need to identify an area and be able to demonstrate whether differentiation has taken place. That is what we want to study now, and we are optimistic that we can identify, describe and analyze these mechanisms.
What did the scientist hit upon in the German woods that was as yet undiscovered and unknown? He'd found the larvae of fire salamanders in the same woodland, but in two different types of water, in flowing water and also in the surrounding standing water. He also found larvae in pools and ditches. These local differences are new and of great interest to science. But what caused a few fire salamanders to drop their larvae also in standing water? Why did they opt for apparently worse conditions? This and many other questions have been occupying Sebastian Steinfahrt's ever since. He's searching for reasons for these differing reproductive strategies for which there is still no conclusive explanation. The search for clues has begun, and so the story of the mysterious fire salamander gets exciting. Rain, just the right thing for the fire salamander. Its habitat needs to be cold and damp. Only then does it feel really comfortable. Rain is also the best thing for its sensitive skin. Thanks to its coloration, this animal was the victim of absurd superstition and wild imagination in past times. The search for the origin of the name fire salamander takes us deep into the past. In those days, people sought ways to control wildfires by any means possible. Until medieval times, the fire salamander was thought to be able to survive glowing embers. People believed that they could douse fires with this animal and threw it into the flames. This is probably why they are called fire salamanders, but it was an unfounded superstition. Some may like it hot, but the fire salamander definitely doesn't. Small wonder that it avoids the sun. In contrast to a mammal, a fire salamander cannot regulate its body temperature. It changes according to the external temperature, and it is thus one of the so-called cold-blooded animals. Its extremely sensitive skin must not dry out. The animal is only healthy if it remains moist. Then it looks as if it has just been polished. Its contrasting coloration is unmistakable. A bright yellow on a black background. These colors are also a warning signal in the animal world. It is supposed to deter predators. It approaches slowly and harmlessly, but watch out, poison glands. They are located all over its body, from head to the tip of the tail. When attacked, it can even squirt a poison. It's called samanderin and is one of the strongest neurotoxins in the animal world. There are two types of color pattern in German salamanders. In Western areas, the banded or vertically striped type is more common. In southeastern Germany, it is the spotted type. Every salamander has a unique and unmistakable pattern by which the animals can be recognized through their lives. No one is like another. Of course, there are hybrids, particularly in the overlap zone. There are also regional colour deviations. Sometimes the colour is red rather than yellow, such as in the Solling, a range of wooded hills in Lower Saxony, and also in southern Germany. Fire salamanders without black have also been found. There are also salamanders that are pure black without any yellow marks. These are mostly isolated specimens. They occur very rarely in the wild. It is not possible to tell from the colour pattern whether an animal is male or female. Despite its bright coloration, it appears rather plump and squat. It has to raise its whole body every time it takes a step. Owing to its low body temperature, a fire salamander moves slowly and unhurriedly. Even so, it sometimes overlooks or misjudges certain dangers. Such tumbles are mostly weathered without much harm. The fire salamander also lives in certain alpine regions. Up here, the summers are much shorter than in the central uplands, and the winters are longer and snowier. Animals living in the high mountains have to put up with the local conditions. Not a problem for the alpine chow. Nor for the chamois. They have adapted to life in the mountains. The alpine salamander is a typical inhabitant of this region. It is noticeably smaller and daintier than its cousin, and it's all black. It only gives birth to 2 young at a time, and not in water. They are born on land and look like miniature alpine salamanders from the start. Like its cousin the fire salamander, the alpine salamander protects itself from predators with poison glands. In the past, amphibians were amongst the least popular animals in Germany. These days, frogs, toads and newts are flagship species, as they are a symbol of intact nature. And these sorts of concerts are no longer considered a nuisance. There are many people who really like these animals. Harry Winkler is one of them. He loves native amphibians and has fulfilled a childhood dream by building his own frog house. With great care, he built up a small zoological collection in a disused pump station. A master carpenter, he built every terrarium himself. Each only holds 1 amphibian species. From yellow-bellied toad to tree frog, from alpine newt to common spadefoot, they are all assembled in his frog house, all of Germany's native amphibians. Of course, he also has fire salamanders in his collection, amongst them an individual that has been living in his care for over 20 years. Today is a special day for Harry Winkler. He's expecting visitors. Parents and their children want to visit the frog house, and he's looking forward to that. And because the weather is so nice, he simply takes his visitors outdoors.
You shouldn't stroke it because it has sensitive skin like all amphibians. In contrast to reptiles, they have a very thin skin.
These are moments that make him proud and happy. To enthuse young people for the fascinating world of amphibians, to pass on his knowledge to children, and to promote the conservation of these animals in the wild. When the children catch the spark and get over their fear of touching the animals, then Harry Winkler, the man with his own frog house and friend of the frogs, toads and newts, is happy. Back to the fire salamander in the upland woods. In Germany, it is active mainly from March to October. Everything happens between spring and autumn: the migration of the females to their spawning grounds, the birth of the young, mating, and finally the migration to the winter quarters. The journey to the world of the fire salamander starts in midsummer. At this time, it hides underground during the day, where it is pleasantly cool and damp. It doesn't like the heat. Other woodland animals can't rest now. For them, summer is child-rearing time. Many animals in the forest are now busy with their offspring. Some have to provide food constantly, such as the great spotted woodpecker. The fox cubs have got used to only being fed at certain times. Stress with the wrens. The two parents take turns to feed. It's much quieter with the black stork. As long as the chicks are still so small, one of the adult birds will guard the nest. Better safe than sorry. The fawn is out and about on its own, but only at the woodland edge. The female sparrowhawk isn't just protecting her young, she's also warming them. And the deer hinds come out with their fawns to graze. At this time of the year, the fire salamander hides in its retreat during the day. They only go foraging when the weather is right. Favourite foods are snails and worms. It has a unique strategy for catching them. It waits until a snail or worm crosses in front of his nose. Then the hunting instinct is suddenly awoken. But even then, it's not hasty. Before it bites, it inspects its prey. Apparently, it is sniffing the worm thoroughly. And only then does it bite. But it isn't working. The worm is trying to wriggle away. But it doesn't want to let such a fat worm get away. It's not easy to seize fleeing and slippery prey. Once the salamander has the worm, though, its fate is sealed, even if the worm writhes ever so much. The fire salamander is pulling it piece by piece with jerky movements into its mouth. And that's how it swallows it, piece by piece. It doesn't kill its prey, it eats it alive. The fire salamander is taboo for most predators because of its warning coloration and its poison. But there are still a number of enemies that are after its life. One such enemy, which at least attempts an attack every so often with its sharp teeth and claws, is the beech marten. The grey heron could also capture it, or at least seriously injure it with its sharp beak. Amongst the raptors, it is mainly the scavengers, like this red kite, that may pose a danger from the air. Not to be overlooked are the corvids, especially the raven. And of course, wild boar. They really are omnivores and are not to be put off by the flashy salamander and its poison. This juvenile was very lucky to lose only the tip of its tail, which will grow again. The mating season of fire salamanders lasts into the summer. The fertilization of the females is remarkable. Following intense body contact, the male gets underneath the female and deposits a small sperm sac, which the female takes up with her sexual organs. After that, the animals go their separate ways. The first cool mornings in September indicate that summer is coming to an end. Nature is getting ready for the onset of winter. This is the time in which animals start gathering food for the winter. Not the fire salamander. It is well fed and has enough reserves for the cold season. When the first cranes start moving south, autumn has arrived. The colourful time of year, just for a short while until the leaves fall. The inner clock of the fire salamander pipes up. It urges it to make its way to winter quarters. A safe retreat must be found, at the latest by the time the first frosts come. The path to the underground winter retreat is sometimes steep and difficult to get to. Rarely will an animal have a good overwintering place to itself. The locations are known amongst fire salamanders and sought out by several animals. By the time winter has moved into the German uplands, the fire salamander's prey has also disappeared from the face of the earth. The salamander can't leave it any later than this to retreat so far underground that it's safe from frost and cold. The fire salamander does not hibernate or go into torpor. It is merely dormant. Its metabolism has converted to power save mode, and it can go without food for the next few months without problems. Even so, it is a long and uncertain time to the next spring. Other animals also seek shelter from cold and snow in the caves, such as bats. They hang head down and motionless until next spring. Outside, winter has put a white, snowy coat over the land. It's the hardest time of the year for animals, also for the red fox. It can hear the voles under the snow, but they aren't easy to capture. Blessed are those who manage to fatten up in autumn, such as the wild boar. They find food despite the snow. The fire salamander doesn't care about these matters in its underground hiding place. It will only re-emerge when winter is over. Weeks and months have passed. Snow and cold have passed. Nature is waking up from its winter sleep. The ravens already have chicks. Migratory birds will soon return to their breeding grounds. The first spring plants are poking their heads out. First among them, Corydalis. And right next to it, the inconspicuous golden saxifrage. The snow-white cups of the snowdrops glow brightly. And in a gentle yellow, the petals of the anemone. The nights are still rather cold, but under the earth, the amphibians are getting ready. They now want to leave their winter quarters. They are just waiting for the first rains, and then off they go. Hunger is driving the animals out. They are already going their separate ways. Whilst the males show few signs of activity, the female salamanders are drawn to the water. For them, it's not only the end of a long winter rest. In the next few nights, it's also the end of their months-long pregnancy. The female salamander arrives at her destination completely exhausted, in the hope of finding the right spot. The chosen path is not always the correct one. Presumably, this female got disorientated and chose an unfavourable route to the water, because it takes her straight to the abyss. But time is pressing, and it's too late to turn back. She has to get to the water as quickly as possible. A calamitous decision. Immediately, she is taken by the current and swept away. With the last of her strength, she tries to save herself. In vain. Stunned, the animal drifts off. Will she survive? A moment that decides everything. A small root gives her the necessary foothold and abruptly ends her journey to death. Lucky. Many a pregnant female has drowned in a strong current. Here in the headwaters is the right place for her to give birth to her larvae in peace, as far away as possible from the fish-rich lower reaches of the stream. Fish are amongst the biggest enemies of salamander larvae. For the next few months, this spring will be a salamander larva creche. They are well camouflaged against the bottom of the stream and can hardly be seen. They share the water with other tiny animals, caddisfly larvae, gammarus, stonefly larvae, and many others. The occurrence of these animals indicates that the water is totally clean, cool, and oxygen-rich. But what is so different and exceptional about those fire salamanders which don't drop their larvae in flowing water, but next door in standing water, ditches, tire tracks and pools? As long as these pools have plenty of water, there is no danger for the larvae. At first sight, they appear to be as suitable for rearing salamanders as the flowing headwaters. But that is deceptive. A race against time has begun, which will mean life or death for the larvae. At first, everything looks just like next door. Here too, the fire salamanders wait until dusk. The pregnant female has been sitting motionlessly on the shore for hours. She can only hold on with her front legs. Her lower body and hind legs are in the water. The larvae will leave their mother's body from this orifice. She's lying in the water quite calmly and is waiting. After nearly an hour, the time has finally come. Suddenly, she presses out the first larvae. It leaves its mother wrapped in an envelope. Minutes later, the next larva arrives. The heartbeat of the newborn can clearly be seen. A fully grown salamander can give birth to up to 60 larvae a year. With a few powerful body movements, they tear up the casing and start their independent lives. From now on, they need to look after themselves without protection from their parents. But not all larvae are viable. Some can't get out of the casing, others are stillborn. Not just in the pools. The larvae in the flowing waters don't grow up without danger and disturbance either. Especially in early spring, there is a risk of heavy rainfall and subsequent flooding. If the salamander larvae are caught by the current and swept into the fish's environment, then they're no longer safe from their worst predator. Then they are at acute risk of losing their lives. For the pool larvae, the problem is the opposite. It is not too much water that threatens their existence, but too little. That could mean that the larvae in the pool need to develop faster. Pool larvae and stream larvae look identical. With their inconspicuous speckled pattern, they are ideally camouflaged in the water. The small yellow flecks on their fore and hind legs are diagnostic. Their eyes are still flat on their heads and do not protrude like those of the adults. The gill branches are a particular feature. They use them to draw oxygen from the water. The gills only degenerate towards the end of the larval stage, when the body converts to lung breathing. The larvae are predators and eat anything they can catch. Deftly, they sneak up and wait for the right moment to grab. They use a special tactic, the so-called suction bite. The larva opens its mouth in a jerky way and creates suction with which the prey is pulled into the mouth like a vacuum cleaner. Eat and be eaten, the endless cycle of life, easily demonstrated in this pool. The fire salamander larvae too have many enemies and constantly have to assume they will get eaten. Like a flash, The dragonfly larva grabs its prey with its special mouthparts and eats it alive. Even if the majority of fire salamander larvae are eaten, enough remain for the species to persist. It hasn't rained for several weeks now. A lot of water has evaporated from the small pools and ditches. Every day there is less. The race for life or death has gone to the next round. The larvae can only win if they have finished their metamorphosis before all the water is gone. As long as they obtain their oxygen via their gills, they rely on a certain amount of water. There is still enough water in the pool, but time is pressing. A further 10 days have passed and it still hasn't rained. The situation in the pools is now critical. The remaining water is dull and musty and has very little oxygen. The larvae are huddled close together. Each is trying to get a place in the water. Some of them already have their body in the air. The main thing is to keep their heads with the gill branches in the water. A fight for survival is peaking. A week later, and still the situation has not improved for the larvae. Not a drop of rain has fallen. The first pools and ditches have already dried out. Here the race has already been decided. Where there's water, there's life. The larvae are fighting for survival in the mud. There appears to be little hope in this desperate situation. The larvae will perish in the mud. Without water, no survival. The fight for survival seems to have ended here. They've lost the race against time and have paid with their lives. The drought is noticeable also in the mountain stream. The stream, normally a babbling brook, is now only a trickle. It's enough for the larvae to survive. The sun has been shining relentlessly for weeks. The drought is leaving its signs everywhere. And then, finally, after a long time, rain. For the larvae in the pool, this rescue came at the last minute. They wouldn't have survived another day. The race against time still hasn't ended, though. Every day, the levels of aggression in the pool increase. Cannibalism is rife. The animals grab anything they can get, even their own species. And again, the sun shines relentlessly. There are visible signs of development in the pool. These are small air bubbles that the larvae exhale every so often. Their metabolism is changing gradually. Their blood circulation is converting from gill breathing to lung breathing. Every day the gill branches behind their ear get smaller and thicker until they are completely gone by the end of the larval stage. The small light patches on the fore and hind legs are now turning yellow. The head and lips are changing. The intervals at which they breathe out are getting smaller. Metamorphosis is in full swing. The body is slowly converting to lung breathing. At the end of the larval stage, their colour changes. They develop the typical yellow-black of the adults. The filigree branches of the gills are shrinking more and more. The shape of the head is also changing. The fin-like seam that envelops the larvae's tail is also shrinking. Step by step, the larvae's appearance changes. The juvenile coloration diminishes, and the typical yellow-black adult colour gets more and more intense. The phase of life in which the larvae in the pool are totally dependent on water is coming to an end. At this time, the eyes change too. As with all living things, the rate of development is not the same for all larvae. Depending on the food availability in the pool, the larval stage takes more or less time. Finally, the first pool larva has completed its metamorphosis. Now it is no longer a water creature, but a real air breather. And then, the decisive moment. A small fire salamander leaves the water for the first time. From now on, it will live on the woodland floor and not seek the water any longer. A short while later, the larvae in the small woodland stream leave the water too. They were spared the agonies the pool larvae had to suffer. Here too, the moment has come when a juvenile leaves the water. The step to adulthood has been completed. Things don't always go to plan in nature either. Sometimes the larvae don't metamorphose at the right time. Here, deep underground, salamander larvae are sometimes found whose development is retarded. This delay in development is known as neoteny in science and effectively means sexual maturity in larval stage without metamorphosis. Isolated from the outside world, these larvae have presumably cannibalized each other and lived off their siblings. At the end, only one remained. How long it can survive without food is questionable. Mysterious fire salamander. The woodland in which the two different types of salamander live is not inaccessible. On the contrary, it is a local recreation area on the doorstep of Bonn on the Rhine, which was the country's capital until 1990.